Do you struggle to maintain weight loss but desperately want to feel good in your own skin, confident in your clothes, and improve your overall health? If so, you're home. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the More Than a Number podcast. I'm Sam. I'm your host, and I am so excited to share with you the interview that I did with my friend Colleen Sloan, who will kind of talk a little bit about how we got to know each other. We've now known each other for over 10 years and have been following each other's careers. And Colleen is just amazing. And I think you guys are really going to love to hear all of the amazing insight and information that she has. She is a PA, a physician assistant. I'm going to read her bio just so you get the full picture of all that she is, and then we'll dive into the interview, okay? So my friend, Colleen Sloan, is a pediatric physician assistant and registered dietitian with over a decade of experience bridging the worlds of medicine and nutrition. She received her Bachelor of Science in Dietetics and Nutrition from FIU, Florida International University, and her Master of Medical Science from Nova Southeastern University. Colleen has worked in both hospital and outpatient settings, specializing in diabetes education, weight management, and pediatric care for patients from infancy through young adulthood. Passionate about addressing the nutrition gap in healthcare, Colleen launched the Exam Room Nutrition podcast to empower clinicians with the tools and confidence to have compassionate, evidence-based conversations about nutrition. She recently joined South University as a principal faculty member to shape the next generation of PA clinicians. Outside of her professional work, Colleen enjoys a good cup of coffee, spending time with her two doggies, and reading books with her amazing 16-year-old daughter. Follow her on Instagram and LinkedIn at Exam Room Nutrition or visit www.examroomnutrition.com. And I want to make sure that everybody understands, even though her podcast is geared towards other clinicians, I glean so much from the conversations that she has. I share them. If you've worked with me or have been a client or a patient of mine, I probably have sent you an episode of Colleen's podcast to watch and to listen to because it is so amazing. It's so encouraging. She gives so much information from many different areas. Specifically, the reason why I wanted to have her on More Than a Number is because our peeps, the people who have been struggling with weight forever, our kind of diet culture, PTSD, mostly ladies, I would say, probably in these like middle age ranges who are struggling and have struggled for a long time with weight. Colleen really can shed some light, especially to those of us who were kids and struggled with weight. Also, if you have kids, how to not pass those, let's say, food behaviors, weird food relationships onto our kids, how we can best support our kids who may be struggling. We also get into some really amazing nutrition information, talking about this protein craze that just keeps on going, the latest things that we've seen that are loaded with protein. We talk about supplements, we talk about peptides, the latest obsession, and really get into some amazing information. So without further ado, I bring to you my interview with my good pal, Colleen Sloan. Hi, Colleen. I'm so excited to have you on my show. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Hey, Sam. So excited to be on your show. You were on mine, so I feel like it's only fitting for me to come on to yours.
Yes. And also, let us take a moment to appreciate. I feel very honored that I was one of the OG guests in the very beginning of your show. And now you have surpassed the 100,000 download mark, which is so exciting.
Thank you. Thank you so
Congratulations.
much. And it's literally only because of amazing guests like you that we are,
Oh.
just growing so much. So thank you.
Thank you for saying that. That's awesome. All right, cool. So let's first share how we know each other. I started working at a hospital here in Palm Beach County right after I passed my RD exam, and you were one of the clinical dietitians there. It wasn't too long though that then you left us and went back to school. So that's how we know each other. But I love it that we have kept in touch and kind of followed each other along the way. And I'm such a fan of you and your work now. I just love so much that even though you moved on in a sense from being a dietitian, you still bring so much of your nutrition knowledge and the passion for nutrition that you have into your current role, which we're going to dive into more. But tell us what that role is and kind of what your why was for doing that.
Yeah, I really love this question because there are some dietitians who leave nutrition and dietetics because they didn't like nutrition or didn't like being a dietitian. And that's actually not why I left at all. I actually consider it like a stepping stone and kind of like a further trajectory of my career. And so after we didn't work together anymore at that hospital, I actually switched over to pediatrics and I worked for very specialty clinics with really sick kids who have disorders that require a lot of special nutrition. Kids
Mhm.
with cleft and craniofacial diseases, cystic fibrosis, which is a disease of the lungs. And so nutrition was really important for those kids. And it was on that team where I got surrounded by a lot of medical interventions that I felt like, okay, I really want to do more than just give the nutrition recommendation. I want to be more on the medical side of this team. I loved the interdisciplinary approach as well. And I knew a bunch of PAs on the team. And I was just like, yep, I think this is what I want to do. And so I switched over and I became a PA. And my love for pediatrics actually blossomed at that clinic where I was a dietitian. And so I did 2 PA schools, about 27 months, so a little over 2.5 years, a little
Wow.
over 2 years. And I've been in outpatient pediatrics ever since I graduated PA school in 2017. And you are so right that I maybe switched, but I never really turned my back on my true love of nutrition and educating patients on how they can fuel their bodies, because I really incorporate it into all of my checkups with my patients. And like we'll talk about my podcast today.
That's awesome. I love it so much. But yeah, so tell us about the podcast. And you're a professor now, too. Professor
I
Sloan, tell us.
I know, it's so fun. So the cool part about like being a professor now is, when we worked in clinic, at least I did, I wore very professional attire, dresses and pumps, and I really loved kind of dressing up for work. And then I went to PA school and became a pediatric PA, and like my quote uniform is like a Minnie Mouse t-shirt, lollipop earrings, and scrub bottoms. So it's like very casual. My daughter says like I dress like a kid. I'm like, yeah, because I work with kids, right? And now, as a professor, I dress very professional, not always in suits, but much more astute looking. And so it's just so fun that I get like those two parts of my personality, which is really fun and goofy with kids, but then I can get very professional and serious when I am teaching. So yes, I joined a PA university here in Palm Beach County, and I am teaching PA students now on communication, how to be a PA, and all things medicine. But they really brought me on the team to incorporate more nutrition education in their PA programming, which I think is
Good.
much needed and fantastic. And yeah, so in all my free time, I also have a podcast, like we've mentioned. And I'm super proud of the podcast because it really blossomed from a gap that I saw in medicine. And it wasn't until I was a PA that I knew this gap existed because I was dealing with it every day. And that gap was that our patients, in my world, it was the pediatric patients, so kiddos, but I saw this now with my colleagues in the adult world. Our patients are not receiving great nutrition advice when they're seeing their primary care physician. And I'm sure anyone listening is like, yes, like, yes to that. This is so true. They either don't really talk about nutrition or maybe give you inappropriate or sometimes hurtful advice that
Mhm.
probably shouldn't have been said. And that is why I started my podcast. Is I had a 9-year-old child who was given really inappropriate and harmful advice about his weight. And that clinician made a lot of comments that scared the child into a future diagnosis or a potential diagnosis. And when I saw that child crying, when they were seeing me for something unrelated, I thought to myself, this isn't right. Like something has to change. And I don't really think it's just more education in school. I really think it's colleague to colleague, like talking about these things and how do you bring that science that we're taught in school and translate that to what could be helpful to the patient in clinic without causing harm. And so like that day I was like, "Ooh, I can combine my love for nutrition and medicine and my knowledge of how to communicate in a podcast. Let's figure out how to do this." So I like went to YouTube University where everyone goes to learn something and kind of self-taught how to start a podcast. And yeah, my goal really is to help clinicians learn how to talk more efficiently, more compassionately about nutrition topics.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, I always joke that I came out of the womb on a diet. I spent my entire life, I don't ever remember a time in my life when I was not overly like hyper focused on my weight and what the scale said because I just for my entire childhood it was always about you have to lose weight every time we went to the doctor just for a random checkup or if I had the sniffles the weight conversation would still come up and honestly I remember my mom, like, defending me and saying, I mean, she doesn't sit in front of the TV eating Cheetos all day. She is active. She is doing things like, pushing back on the clinicians who were pushing on her because I was always, in the higher percentiles and everything. So, I mean, I was on every diet known to man. I specifically can remember this awful experience of there was like a hospital childhood obesity program that they put me in. But you went to the hospital and we would like line up in this single file line and they would march us around the building of the hospital and we would be like walking and that was our exercise. And I mean, it's innocent enough. Like, I understand their intention behind it, but I felt like a zoo animal,
Right.
Like, I just felt like I was on display, and all these people were like, oh, look at the chubby kids, like, walking around that need to lose weight. And it was awful. So, I, of course, do not fault my parents at all or hold any resentment towards them because they did the best that they could. And, you know, truth be told, back then, like, 80s and 90s, it was the wild, wild west. I mean, we didn't really know any better. So I'd really, really love your input specifically as it relates to, weight management, especially with pediatrics, with kids. How do you approach that topic with your patients who are tracking in those higher percentiles?
I love this question so much because it's something I deal with every day. And before I answer it, I actually wanted to bring up something that you had mentioned in telling that story is your mom was your advocate.
Mhm.
And I think parents are sometimes scared to do that for their child because they look to medical professionals as having such authority. But I really want to empower parents to truly be the advocate that you can be and should be for your child, especially when it comes to weight and their body size, because they're too young. They don't know that they can say, hey, that makes me feel uncomfortable, or I don't want to talk about that. Really, the adult, the safe adult in that room needs to advocate for that child. And I love that your mom did that. And you're right, like 80s and 90s, we thought we were doing the right thing. Like we thought that was helpful. But now we know better, so hopefully we can do a little bit better. And pediatrics is such an interesting specialty because you have like 2-in-1 plus 3-in-1 patients, depending on who's in the room with you. My patient is the child, and I see kids from birth until 21. So they're adolescents and even sometimes adults. But my patient is that child, but also the parent. Often it's the mom, but sometimes mom and dad are there. Sometimes mom and dad are separated or divorced and they're both there together. And that's a different, kind of difficulty that we have to navigate. And sometimes we have grandparents who are in the room. And if they're not in the room, they're often involved in feeding the child. And so it's tricky because you're navigating so many different people's journey with food and dieting themselves, right? If you pull those three people, a grandma, a dad, and a mom, they've all had their different story with their weight, with how they view food, how they feel about certain foods, what nutrients are good versus bad. And then they're portraying that onto the child who is learning what their relationship with their food and their body looks like. Couple that with the fact that a child is not responsible for the food that they are consuming, whether
Right.
it's through purchasing or choosing, most often. Now, when they get into the teen years, they have a little bit more autonomy, but sometimes not. They have a little bit more, ability to choose, from the cafeteria or if they go out with their friends. But often parents are still the ones bringing food inside the home. So education can be really tough because I have to educate the child, but often it's directed toward the parent. And more often than not, I find that I'm just re educating and kind of redirecting their mindset toward what is appropriate for the child. And what I mean by that is, let's take a 42-year-old, 45-year-old woman. She is likely going through perimenopause. She may or may not be wanting to still lose, some baby weight or the, 10-year-old baby weight, which is stubborn. So she might be on her own health journey. She also might be fearful for the future. So she's kind of fearing diagnoses that can come with age, whether it be diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, those types of things. So she's thinking about her diet in different ways. What that tends to lead to is a very restrictive mindset. And so unfortunately, also that generation, the older millennials, grew up
Mm-hmm.
in dieting culture. And so we already naturally have such a fear of carbohydrates, a fear of fat, and now with social media, a fear of literally everything. And so parents put that fear onto the child, and often they have those same food rules and they bring that into what the child should be consuming. I find this is often hardest for women who have body image issues or who may be women in normal body sizes or even small body sizes who have a child in a larger body size. I find those women struggle the most with accepting that their child maybe doesn't look like them or is struggling with her body weight the most. And so
Wow.
when I'm educating parents, I often have to remind them, like, hey, you're in a different season of life. Your nutrition needs are completely different than your child's. So are your nutrition goals. You're focusing on low carbs, high protein. Your child probably needs high carbs and lower protein because they're a
Right.
child. They don't need as much. So a lot of that education is just kind of mindset in helping parents understand what normal growth looks like as well. We have to remember that children are going through puberty. And so their body is going to change and it's expected to gain weight. I expect them to put on weight every time I see them. That is not a surprise to me. And we do have to respect the phase or stage of puberty that that child is in and make sure that we're not creating unrealistic goals for this child based on kind of what their growth pattern has looked like over time. So I hope that answered your question, but I'm happy to go into more detail on what I talk about specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I, at the very beginning of my career, when I first started as a clinical dietitian, I did spend some time in private practice, um, and and worked with a lot of pediatric patients. And at first, I shouldn't say at first I enjoyed it and then I didn't. I enjoy working with the patient, the child, but what was really frustrating to me the most were the parents who kind of just dropped the child off and was like, "Oh, tell them what to eat," and then would be outside on the phone or, doing something on the computer or whatever in the lobby, and I would try to encourage them to come in and, especially the younger kids. Like, an 8-year-old is not getting in the car and driving to Publix and getting groceries and coming home and cooking. So I felt like a chore sometimes to get the parents involved. So, you talked a little bit about the patient, the child. How would you kind of approach that with parents? I think especially of the younger kids who don't even really know what you're talking about, and the scale doesn't really mean anything to them, but the parents obviously are, let's say, challenging.
For lack of better words, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I approach this differently based on the child's age. Um, there's a there's some debate amongst medical professionals, and honestly, I don't think enough professionals do this appropriately. But I take the stance that it is not appropriate for a young child, really younger than puberty, to be talked about their weight in front of them. So often, I won't even have a weight conversation in front of the child because, like you said, they actually don't really understand that concept of what this means, especially because in pediatrics, we talk about growth percentiles. And to a child, a percentile is a grade. And it's
Mhm.
really easy for them to misunderstand what it means to be at, 50th percentile, 80th percentile, 110th percentile. They don't have a concept of what that means, nor should they. So often, all I'm talking about when the child is present is their behaviors. And I get a lot of questions from my PA students who are like, but what if the child is overweight and they need to lose weight? What do you say? And I actually revert that and I say, rarely do children need to lose weight. Often they'll
Mhm.
grow into themselves, and we don't need to focus on that weight. We need to shift it and focus on the behaviors that maybe cause them to get to that weight in the first place. Or those are really the things that we can control, right? Maybe we just need to talk about sugar intake. Maybe we need to talk about not skipping breakfast. Maybe we need to talk about their snacks or the late night snacking. And if we can get those behaviors in line with kind of general nutrition guidelines and a little bit healthier, then what happens? Weight is a byproduct. It's either going to stall out, right? Which is kind of what we want. We don't want more weight gain, or it might kind of fall in line because as they're growing in height, their body size is going to fall into that comfortable place. So I really don't ever tell a child ever, you need to lose weight. It's probably the most harmful thing you can tell someone. And I've had parents say to me, they sit down and they say, you need to tell him that he needs to lose weight. And I look right back to the mom and I say, I'm not going to do that because he doesn't need to lose weight, even if he's in a larger body size. And it's a very hard concept for adults to really understand because for children, remember, they are growing. Their body is going to be changing. Their body composition is not yet set, right? Especially if they're boys, they might not even have testosterone on board to build muscle mass. So they
Right.
can't really change what's going on. But we can focus on the foods that they're choosing, the drinks that they're drinking, how they're moving their bodies. And that's much more of an effective and safe for their mental health approach than saying, Johnny, you need to lose 15 pounds by the next time you come in. That's not helpful advice. And that's not helpful for adults either. We know this based on years and decades of the horrible advice we've been
Mm.
giving. So, that's on one end. So going back to how I adjust this based on the age of the patient. So a child, I don't really even talk about their weight, their growth chart, because they link their value and their worth to where they fall on the growth chart. And I have found if it's a child in a larger body and I show them that growth curve, siblings will often giggle if they see how like their curve went, in a vertical line upward and they're way off the normal quote unquote percentiles, and they'll kind of chuckle and make fun a little bit. And I don't ever want my environment to be a place where that child feels judged or unsafe. So younger children, we talk about behavior. Older children, I start with permission. And by older, I mean like 8 or 9. I will ask
Oh.
a child, hey, do you feel comfortable if we talk about your growth this year? And this is especially important in teens. I have had some kiddos say, nope, I'm not comfortable. And immediately mom goes, oh, but I want to see. And I pause and I say, that's fine. When she goes to the lab or when he's getting his vaccines or whatever, we'll have him step outside of the room. I am happy to show it to you and discuss it with you alone. And then we can talk about, maybe some strategies we can incorporate in the house if there are any concerns on my end. So you have to respect where that patient is with comfort level with how you're talking about their body. Now, that being said, if they do feel comfortable with it, I think data can be helpful. I think it is important. If there has been an unintended 30-pound weight gain, which we actually saw a lot of during COVID when they were ripped from their team sports, they were ripped from their school, they sat at home all day with nothing but a screen in front of them to entertain them. Of course, they all gained weight, right? And then
Right.
sometimes it just didn't ever come off because we never went back to our old habits. So if I do see something like that, I might talk about it, but we don't have to call out the elephant in the room. I mean, if you've ever gained weight, you know you've gained weight. You don't need someone to tell you, wow, it looks like you've put on some weight. That's not helpful. You already know that, and likely you already feel ashamed of it, embarrassed by it. So calling that out's not helpful. But I like to find out and say, you might have noticed, your clothes might be fitting differently, or you might have noticed you feel different in your body this year. What's happened? Like, what's been going on? Is there anything different about this year?
Mm.
And they can then reflect, oh yeah, I quit playing soccer. Or I actually had a patient tell me, yeah, we're homeless now. We've been living in our car for 2 months. And
Oh.
that piece of information was vastly important to me because now I need to give them social services. I don't need to be giving them education, right? So I find if we as a clinician can just pause and step back and just ask some questions and let the patient share more information about what's been going on in their life, then you can troubleshoot and give better advice than just rattling off that they need to eat 5 fruits and vegetables and choose lean protein at most meals, right? Like make
Right.
it realistic for their life.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Um, I, I think we kind of have already like answered this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I know you'll have even more insight. But do you find that probably the vast majority of parents, maybe some men, but I would venture to guess more so women, can kind of pass along their own weird food relationships, disordered eating, body dysmorphia, those types of things onto their kids? And do you notice if there's a difference in a son or a daughter?
I love this question. And yes, 100%. I alluded to it a little bit before that I often will have, that perimenopausal woman bothered by the fact that her daughter might be in a larger body size, or they just I don't understand how puberty works or genetics too, right? Sometimes I might look at a child and be like, you are the spitting image of your dad, right? Who is short and stocky. Or, we talk about larger bodies, but the same goes for kids in smaller bodies. There's also stigma that happens for them. They're, called out because they look like a string bean, or we need to put meat on your bones. And so they can kind of feel uncomfortable about their body size too. So it's not just people who are in a larger body. Now, that being said, parents always put their food rules on the child. I see this time and time again. And I've actually seen this in kind of an athlete world where parents were misunderstanding the role of a nutrient. So I was talking to a teen, I think she was like 15. She was a soccer player. And I'm like, oh, perfect. Like, how are you fueling for your sport? I like to find out, what are you eating prior to exercising, maybe prior to your games? Because I'm looking for carbs, right? I'm looking for making sure they're eating enough energy to get them through that game. Oh, I used to eat cereal. I used to love cereal, but I don't eat it anymore. My dad doesn't let me. And I was like, what? Cereal, And so I asked the dad, he was in the room. I'm like, why can't she have cereal? And he's like, oh, because it has too much sugar. Like, we got rid of all of the sugar in our house because I want her to eat healthy. And it was a great moment of education because the role of a carbohydrate is vastly different for that child who's about to run for like an hour and a half.
Right.
She needs those carbohydrates. And that added sugar is actually a great source of quick energy for her. For you, dad, who has different goals, again, maybe the Lucky Charms is probably not the best choice for you, but it doesn't mean it's not a good choice for that child. So that's where nutrition is so nuanced of like, there is no such thing as a bad food. It just really depends on the situation that it is consumed. So that's another piece of education of like carbs and sugar and when and how they fit within our patients.
Yeah, I love that. Um, so, one of the things I love so much about you is your passion for this specific area of nutrition, obesity, and weight management. And, like I said, grew up on a diet my entire life. I have lived the struggle. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I to this day struggle with anxiety when I go to the doctor. Despite, you know, keeping off a 200-pound weight loss for the last 2 decades, like I still feel that sense of panic, really, like in that moment. And I don't really calm down until I'm in the room and seated, and still some lingering because I'm waiting for them to say something about it. And I think I know I'm not alone there. So many people dread going to the doctor and won't go specifically because they don't want to get weighed. And, I used to joke with my family that it was like, I mean, I could break my arm and go to the doctor and they'd be like, you probably should lose some weight. I'm like, what about this broken arm though? Like maybe you could fix that. So, again, I know I'm not alone there. You are so careful and so sensitive to that topic. And you literally created this obesity nutrition course, obesity medicine nutrition course specifically for clinicians to learn how to best care for this population. So, tell us a little bit about that, the course and why you felt so convicted to create it, along with the podcast, which you did already talk a little bit about. But it's kind of, both of those areas are just such an amazing tool to speak to other clinicians, and it's working. Like, you have 100+ thousand downloads and people respect you and listen to you. And it makes me excited for moving forward in this area.
I am so passionate about this topic,
Mhm.
and I think it's because I see it from the lens of my patients. I have so many patients who have come to see me or have come under my care specifically because of the way I handled and spoke about their body size, their weight. I have made tons of my patients cry, but in a good way, in a way that they are like, no one has ever asked me if I was comfortable talking about my body size. Or no one has explained like what's going on with my body during puberty like you have. Like I understand now and I can like accept my body, right? Like so many of these kids are just told like they're they're told that they're fat. Like that is like even just that word like sends chills down my spine. No one wants to hear that. And a child never needs to hear that. They already probably know they look different. From a trusted, safe adult, they don't need to be condemned or embarrassed at all about how their body is. And I liken it to dog sizes, right? There are small
Mhm.
dogs and large dogs. There is nothing healthy or unhealthy about either one of them. Just genetically, they're different. And I like to remind kids like different is okay. Like it is absolutely okay and there's nothing wrong with you. And the little tears that well up in their eyes when they just are like, oh, thank you. Like, thank you for telling me that because everyone wants to feel like they belong and that they're good. Like there's nothing wrong with them. So yes, I am so passionate about this. I can talk about it forever. I think a big reason, yes, why I started the podcast was to share nutrition education because there's a misunderstanding that doctors, PAs, NPs don't get nutrition education in school because they do. All of the curriculum has education, but it's more targeted toward, I would say, medical interventions. So, for example, When my PA students are learning about the cardiovascular system, so heart disease, they do learn about sodium intake and how it affects blood pressure. They also learn about the Mediterranean diet because it's been heavily studied for cardiac conditions. And they learn about, for example, if we're talking about diabetes, they learn about carbohydrates and the quote diabetic diet. So they learn it in kind of I would say buckets in regards to medical diagnoses so that they can give a little bit of information and education for the patient who is sitting there. But then it kind of stops there. And where I feel like my training as a PA was limited, granted, I had it as a dietitian, so I was able to kind of piece it together. Um, it's the counseling side of things is like, okay, I told a patient to lower their sodium intake to 1500 milligrams a day. Have a good day as a PA. But the patient is like, what on earth does that mean? What can I eat? Like, how do I read a food label? How do I know if something is 1500 milligrams? What does that look like? So it's the counseling side of things of like, how do I put this fact into practice in the patient's life sitting in front of me that requires nuance? But those are the types of conversations I like to have on my podcast. And then specifically in the course, it is all about obesity medicine, and a little piece of it is prescribing GLP-1s because that's also not something that we were taught in school because it's such a new medication. But it is really about creating goals for the patient, partnering with them, and the other pillars that we can talk about and the other metrics that we can measure besides body size, because I want to get away from the only success is if you lose X number of pounds. That might not even be a realistic for that patient based on the stage and season that they're in. Maybe we'd rather lower their A1C so they're no longer on metformin. Or maybe we can improve their blood pressure so much that they go from 3 blood pressure lowering medications to 1 or none. Those are all wins in my mind. And that's really the goal of the obesity course, was to help clinicians look outside the box from just having a weight loss centric goal into other non-scale victories. And then how do you communicate that with your patients? And I also am really, really passionate about, like what you had mentioned, not making everything about the patient's weight. I love that example you gave of like, you broke your arm and then they're like, hey, maybe you should lose some weight. And I take it from the clinician's lens. And when I talk to dietitians about this, I sympathize with clinicians, and then I want to explain why. It's because in our minds, we think it may be linked, right? Especially when a patient comes in with something that is linked to their body size, knee pain, back pain, their diabetes, what else? Maybe constipation could be diet related, right? So then we immediately jump to, well, if you lost some weight, your knee might not hurt so bad. And it just becomes this habitual thing. And in medicine, our responsibility as a clinician is to fix it. You come to the doctor, the PA, with a concern. My throat hurts. I have to fix it as a clinician. I need to figure out, is it strep? Is it mono? Is it an abscess that you need to go to the hospital for? How do I treat it? Prescribe the treatment and quote, fix you. You leave with a treatment, with a solution essentially. But nutrition is very, very different. But unfortunately, clinicians take that fix it approach to, oh, you have this problem of your diet, your weight, medical condition. Here, just do this diet or just stop eating this. And it becomes very much of like, I tell you what to do, you do it, and that's it. And that's where advice is lost on the patient. That's not helpful type of advice. So again, it goes back to that asking deeper questions, to getting to know your patient. Like you said, some patients don't even want to or talk about their weight right now. They have other concerns. So it's like the first thing I always teach new clinicians and my students is asking like, what are your biggest concerns today? What can I help you with today? Then I hear that. And then I say, well, I have, one or two things that I would like to bring up if it's okay. So we can address all of those, right? Because if your concern is your broken wrist, we need to address that first. I think that's where there's like a little bit of miscommunication amongst clinicians and patients. You want one thing and I'm trying to focus on another, and we just need to start seeing eye to eye.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of like leads me right into the next question that I was going to ask you is, how can we, as the patient going into the clinician's office, take some of that control and, our own autonomy and be able to say, I don't want to talk about this, or I don't want to get on the scale. Like, how can we empower ourselves going into a physician's office in a situation where they do feel uncomfortable? Like, how can they flip that to empower themselves so that they're not going to the doctor just because they don't want to get on the scale?
I think that that is such a sad and real reason for patients to stop going to the clinician. Like, that makes me so upset that someone would have such a negative experience in a place that is supposed to heal and protect.
Mhm.
And so I love empowering patients on how can you make this what you need it to be, right? This is where we are supposed to get treatment, get guidance, have support. And if your provider isn't making that environment for you, number one, you might need to find a new provider. That's just number one. Number two, there are a couple of things that you can do to sort of let the clinician know where you are at with your comfort level. Because unfortunately, not all of them are informed, is kind of trauma informed, weight stigma informed, and they might not give you the option to discuss your weight. So I always teach my students, ask your patients, adult patients, hey, we're moving into the nutrition side of it. Are you comfortable if we talk about some of the foods that you're eating? Or I'd like to review your weight over the last year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it is. Are you comfortable talking about that today? If that's not a question you're being asked, you can and you have the right to say sort of upfront, hey, I know this is my annual, but I am going through kind of my own journey and I don't want to talk about my weight. I don't really want to see my weight. Can we talk about other things? And they should, hey, yep, that's no problem, but I am here for you when and if you're ready. That's a great response. And that's a very caring clinician. But if they say, oh no, but your weight it really is a problem, you still could push back and say, no, no, I really would, I would love if you could respect my choice to not talk about it. But if they push, that's a time for a new clinician. I don't think that they are the right team member for you. I also think this starts before you even see the doctor or the PA. Um, Offices should now hopefully soon, be offering what's called a blind weight. I know, Sam, you talk about this. If it's not offered, because a lot of primary care clinics aren't doing that, especially urgent care or even ERs won't do this. But if it's not offered, you can ask before you even step on the scale, right?
Yes.
It it is part of medicine. You are weighed. Now, this is also debatable if it's necessary for an ER visit or an urgent care visit to get your weight. Because in pediatrics, it is necessary because your medication is weight based. I dose you based on how big your or small your body is. In adults, it's a standard dose. So if you're 130 or 300, you're still going to get the 500 milligram tablet or whatever it is. So it's debatable if you even have to be weighed as part of the vital signs. Now, if it's an annual, it's probably a good idea. So someone is tracking this over time. But you can ask, can I please do a blind weight? Or please don't tell me my weight. I don't want to know what my weight is. And if you say blind weight and they don't know, you can just say, I'd like to step on the scale, but please don't tell me what my weight is, or can you please cover the weight? And you don't even have to say why. You can just say, I'm going through my own journey and I don't feel comfortable with, my weight today. Or even if you don't want to be weighed, is it necessary? Do I have to be weighed today? I don't really want to be weighed. I think that's where it starts, is right when those vitals, get taken. And then again in the room, you can even ask them to put an alert or a note inside your chart. Most of the time there's electronic health records now, and we can create like a little alert. I have several of my preteen girls that do not want their weight discussed, and her and I have made that agreement. But in case she sees someone else, if it's a sick visit and I'm not in the office, it's an alert that's on there that says patient is not comfortable discussing weight. Do not discuss weight with the patient in the room. I put that alert in there, but you can even ask, could you put a, alert that says I'm not comfortable with weight conversations. So anyone else, I don't have to have this conversation with them. That is a great way to empower yourself. I think. And then, feel confident enough that if this is going in a direction that you're not comfortable with, to just say, I'm not comfortable with this. It's just, medicine is consent. Clinicians are trained to get consent for anything. Think about it. Any procedure you've done, if they're doing a private area check, we do have to get consent. I need your consent so I can touch your body when I do the exam. And I think clinicians are just learning that permission to talk about weight and body size is also part of consent. So if they are going in a direction that you don't feel safe or comfortable, you're not giving them consent. So you have every right to say, this is not a conversation I'd like to have this time. I might be open to it next time, but can we talk about, and then maybe have something already prepared. Can we talk about, I don't know, my ankle pain or my sleep? I'm not sleeping great. And again, if they try to go to weight, you can say, hey, I know this might be related, but is there anything else that it could try or that it could be related to? I also think it's really helpful to come prepared with 2, 3 max questions, concerns, or issues that you want to discuss, so that if the clinician doesn't really know what to talk about, you're giving them the priorities and the things that you would like to get out of the conversation. And I promise you, as a clinician, we really like when you come in with a list, because it helps me streamline kind of where I need to go with the conversation. And I make sure that I am addressing your priorities so you feel like you got something out of the visit.
Yeah, that's great. I think the blind weight is so important because, and honestly, like I maybe didn't even realize this until I started working in the bariatric space, because, we weigh our patients and it is very important, especially with that patient population. But even many of my patients in the bariatric program can get in their heads about their weight loss and everything. And so I always tell them, I need you to get on the scale because I need to see what it is just to make sure we're all good and that, we're kind of tracking along the way, but I don't need to tell you. So you tell me if you want to know, we can talk about it or we don't have to talk about it at all. So I love the blind weight thing, and I think that is very empowering. But something that you said in addition to that is very helpful, the alert, because I will say I have done that in the past where going to get on the scale, I say, listen, I'm not in the right headspace to see this number right now. So I'm going to close my eyes and I don't want to see it or talk about it. And they were like, okay, cool. And then we went in the room and the doctor sits down and like opens the thing and it's this big black bold letters or numbers, of
Yeah.
what it was on the scale. So I saw it anyways. And I was like, oh, well, that was kind of pointless, but it is definitely something that can be very helpful, very empowering. So I would encourage anybody that's listening that is fearful or feels anxious going to the doctor to, not hold back and to, be your own advocate and know when you're not in that position or headspace to hear that number. And it's totally cool to request that blind weight and to have them put a little alert that that's not something that you want to talk about today.
Yeah.
So, like you say with your patients, we're moving into the nutrition portion of our conversation now. And I wanted to kind of just dip our toe in the protein conversation because so much has been said, which we're not even going to go down that rabbit hole of the changes to our, RDA and the protein recommendations and everything have increased. And I personally, people call me a protein pusher, and I don't push back on that name because I am proud of it. I think there are so many benefits to a higher protein diet. However, I will say before I hand it over to you, I am very careful about, making sure people understand A higher protein diet does not mean only eat protein and eat, 300 grams of protein a day. It just means on the higher end of our range, percent range of our daily calories. So typically, my idea of a higher protein diet is anywhere from like 25 to 35% of our daily calories coming from protein, an average of 30%. So I just think there are so many benefits specifically to long-term weight management, which is, my area of expertise. Just would love your thoughts on that and any insight or input you have on ways that a higher protein diet can benefit that long-term weight loss and weight maintenance.
It's a great topic. When you said that you're a protein pusher, it made me laugh and think of the Mean Girls movie when she
Mhm.
was talking about her being like, I'm a pusher. So that's what it reminded me of. So if you're a millennial, you'll know of the Mean Girls reference I made there. um, Okay, I love that you're a protein pusher. I am on team fiber. So I think fiber is like the forgotten nutrient. And I think they should be best friends because
Yes.
fiber and protein together is like the perfect uh, muscle protein synthesis and satiety combo that you can get. However, yes, I agree with you 100%. Higher protein is really important and needed during weight loss and for muscle building and for, maintaining your lean mass. It stimulates muscle synthesis. It also helps you feel fuller longer. When you're in a calorie restriction, that feeling of deprivation and that just feeling that pit in your stomach of, oh, I'm hungry can really be abated by including protein in each meal. So I actually am in the same camp with you with your guidelines and kind of the recommendations that you do. I also think we're in this like proteinification of everything. I am a fan of high quality protein. I don't think the popcorn protein is as beneficial and helpful as maybe some lean turkey from the deli or even like a bean salad, right? So I think there's a time and place for protein supplement type foods. They can be a great addition, but I still want to focus on the basics of getting protein from real food and spreading it out throughout the day. We really don't need to be backloading, dinner of like 100 grams of protein and then not having anything for breakfast, for example. It needs to be spread out throughout the day. That's number one. And I also want to say, number two is increase it gradually. I think we see online of like, we need 1 pound, no, 1 gram of protein per pound. And it ends up being like 300 grams of protein. And that's, I think, impossible. I'm sure it's doable, but very challenging. And you'll probably feel very uncomfortable if you go from 80 grams a day and then you're trying to triple that. That's not realistic, nor is that sustainable. So I like to start when I'm working with patients. Like, what are you currently eating? If you're only at 60 grams, but I've calculated your goal at like 150, we're not going to be at 150 tomorrow. Let's maybe get you to 100 over the next few weeks. And that's adding in, a Chobani yogurt drink has 20 grams. Can we add that in for like a mid-morning snack? And then maybe we can add in like deli meat, like maybe roast beef or turkey roll-ups with cheese and some carrot sticks for like the afternoon snack, right? So then we're kind of piecing in 20, 30 grams kind of in two different places to slowly increase. I find patients try this maxing of everything, whether it's fiber maxing or protein maxing, and then they like exhaust themselves or they feel like complete garbage because nothing should be maxed. And then they just give up and then revert back to where they were before. So slow and steady is the smartest way when it comes to protein and fiber. And then I do want to talk about, actually, that's a question. I think I want to talk about supplements. I'll have you ask me that question because I think that's an important part of the conversation when it comes to protein. But I am of the camp of like food first. How can we incorporate, food from protein from real food sources throughout your day and then fill in with supplements as needed?
Amen to that. Yes. And I completely agree. I think fiber is so overlooked, mainly because I think people are still just terrified of carbohydrates.
Yeah.
And it's wild to me. That's why I'm so diligent about making sure that people understand when I say higher protein, I am not taking out anything else. We're just having a higher percentage of our calories coming from protein. And we definitely need that fiber. Also, by the way, I don't know if you saw my post recently, but did you see the Doritos?
No, Doritos came on board with it too.
10 grams of protein in the Doritos. Colleen, it's
You know,
crazy.
they're trying to compete with Quest, right? Quest has
Mm-hmm.
protein chips and cookies and
Right.
all of that. And there's a market for it. I understand there's that health halo of like, oh, these are chips, but there's protein, so it's good. And
Yes.
I wanted to mention in this protein conversation is protein also contributes to calories. So if you're just increasing your protein without like adjusting somewhere else, meaning lower fat or lower processed foods or lower added sugars or something else, all you're doing is consuming more calories. The other
Right.
thing that people forget is if you were trying to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, we've got to be exercising and specifically
Mm-hmm.
weightlifting. Protein only gets you so far for lean mass. You've got to be building muscle through weight training. So I think people kind of forget that. They think like it's all protein, but no, if you're just consuming a ton of extra protein, your body's going to kind of shift that into your extra calories and then fat storage if you're not burning it or lessening your total energy intake from somewhere else.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we saw that a lot too when in the heart of like the keto craze, where all of a sudden everything was like keto friendly. All the
Yeah.
labels were keto friendly, and people were eating all this keto friendly stuff, over processed stuff, and wondering why they weren't losing weight. It has calories. It's not just
Yeah.
because it's high protein or it's keto or whatever, doesn't mean that you're gonna lose weight if you're in a calorie surplus. That just scientifically, physically cannot happen. And yes, definitely in the realm of supplements, I talk a lot about certain supplements on the pod. So I would love to get your opinion. You kind of alluded a little bit to it there. But anything from protein supplements to vitamins to creatine. I think creatine all of a sudden is having this like rebirth in the perimenopausal
Yeah.
space and everything. And it's so funny to see how things kind of like go in a cycle. Collagen still kind of hanging in there. So yeah, give us your thoughts on all that good stuff.
Yeah, it's funny how these trends come in waves. I feel like creatine is now like the weighted vest was for the perimenopause women. Like they were all in their little weighted vest walking. Now they're all like promoting creatine. And I love both, right? Like I've got a
Right.
weighted vest and I love creatine too. It's just funny to see like the trends sort of follow the science, but sort of get, I don't know, misconstrued a little bit.
Yeah.
So let's start with creatine. There's actually a lot of science behind it. It's been a very well studied supplement in the sports medicine world for decades. We've got hundreds, I think even like thousands of literature on it and how it helps with performance, recovery. It doesn't necessarily help with muscle building. I think that's a misconception a lot with the younger athletes as well. It's not an anabolic steroid, so women can also safely take it. You're not going to become a bodybuilder because it doesn't actually stimulate like muscle growth. It stimulates healing. There's also some new research within the menopause, perimenopause phase of helping with kind of brain fog and things like that. They're doing some studies on Alzheimer's prevention, not necessarily treatment, but sort of prevention and help with cognition. So it's a very interesting supplement. It also has a very good safety profile. So it's sort of one of those that I'm like, there's not really anything dangerous about it. Of course, if someone's maxing it, right, we really only need to have 5 grams per day. You don't need to go beyond that. Some literature for certain things like bone density and or cognition can go up a little bit. But really, there's no medical conditions that should be contraindicated. So even if you have diabetes or high blood pressure, or if you're on medications, it's not going to interact with anything. Children can also take it as well. It's been sort of studied in older adolescents, but the safety profile is wonderful. One caveat is if you take creatine, let your provider know that you are, because your creatinine, which is a kidney function number, can be elevated. It is safe. It doesn't mean it's damaged your kidneys, but it's something that we just need to know. Because if we don't know and we see elevated creatinine, then we can be a little bit concerned. But it does not damage your kidneys. But for someone who has maybe chronic kidney disease or already has some kidney issues, we do proceed with caution. There is some data that says you might want to avoid it if you already have pre-existing kidney disease, but it will not damage your kidneys. So that's also something that comes up a lot. So that's a supplement. I would say, yeah, I give it the green light for most people. I think it can be beneficial. If you are on a budget, because like who isn't these days, it's not something I would say like you have to be adding to your supplement stack. I would rather you can go and buy maybe some more lean protein, like some fish or some more produce, rather than waste your money on a supplement that you may or may not need. So that's my caveat with that. Um, Let's talk about protein supplements. They come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. You can get powders, you can get ready to made drinks. I mean, they're in everything now, right? Protein is like added, like we've talked about with the Doritos and the chips, and you can get them as cookies. I am a fan of the powders or the pre-mixed drinks, as opposed to the unhealthy food marketed as healthy because it has some extra protein in it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I love using shakes as either a meal replacement or a snack. So for people who don't love breakfast or who are rushing in the morning, or maybe are learning to eat breakfast and they just feel nauseous and don't love breakfast, great time to drink liquid protein because it's easy to get down. You don't really have to chew it, and it's pretty well tolerated as well. I also love it for people who do have pretty higher protein needs, 180s. If you're getting into the 200s, I think it's really hard to eat that much volume of food to get that protein. So a shake once or twice a day can be really, really helpful as well. I also find liquid protein supplements great if you're on a GLP-1 and you're doing dose escalation, because you often, may have experienced constipation, nausea, sometimes vomiting, or your appetite just is tanked. It's a really good way to get the protein in when you're not feeling so great. So they even make like clear liquid proteins that's really easy to tolerate. So those are some indications that I think it would be a wonderful option. I also love like the pre-made drinks. It's just really important to be aware of the added sugar in those, like the
Mm-hmm.
chocolate milk, that's protein. Just make sure we're not eating 30 grams of added sugar as well as 30 grams of protein. So you do want to try to find that one that has, I would say, probably less than 10, maybe even less than 5 grams of added sugar for sure in those drinks. I'm thinking of the Chobani, yogurt drinks. That product is great. It has no added sugars and it tastes wonderful. And it has like 20, and I think one even has like 35 grams of protein. Wonderful. Just be aware of other yogurt drinks because those are sweetened and they're sweetened with sugars. So you're kind of not helping yourself if you're eating too much added sugar there. Protein bars are also a really interesting supplement on the market. Again, you have to read a label, and this is where working with a dietitian can be very, very helpful because they can kind of teach you what to look for in a bar. Those can often be almost as much as a meal. Like I've seen some that are like 350 calories, and granted, maybe 45 grams of protein, but they also will have carbs and some added sugars. Because some of those bars are for marathon runners and they're used for, energy after a long workout. So be aware of which ones you're choosing and try to have one again with the least amount of added sugars. Don't be afraid of carbs, but we really don't want a lot of added sugars in there. At least 10 to 20 grams of protein in it, depending on the portion size. If it got some fiber in there, that's
Yeah.
even better. I'd love to see kind of a little combo of like 4 to 5 grams of fiber with some protein in those bars. And again, it could be a great either meal replacement depending on the calories, but I like using those as a snack. They taste wonderful. So sometimes it can be a good like dessert replacement, or even like afternoon snack if you're getting the munchies.
Yeah. I think it's so funny how bars have come so far now too, that there's just such like a vast array of like may as well be a straight up candy bar
Yeah.
to, the complete opposite extreme. So, well, I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole. We don't have time for it. And also, it's too much. But I would love to touch on the latest obsession that is just, I don't know that I've ever seen anything quite like this before in the area of just health and wellness, even weight loss. And of course, if you haven't guessed yet, we're talking about peptides. There is this growing, just absolute obsession. So, like I said, without getting like too specific, and what I wanted to ask you about is separate from the GLP-1. So I think sometimes people don't realize those weight loss injectables are peptides. And now I think it's kind of funny that they're being marketed as peptides instead of the GLP-1 weight loss drugs, because for some reason people think that they're going to sell more and I guess people like talking about them more as peptides versus the drugs. But regardless, those aside, all of these other kind of different injections that you can take of these peptides. And I even see like friends on Facebook, like people that I've known for a million years are now all of a sudden the expert in peptides. And they're posting like, I've been on this one, and this one for 3 months now, and I feel fantastic. And here's how you can buy it from me, and yada, yada, yada. So what is one message as a clinician that you would give my audience if they are, let's say, peptide curious?
It's such a good question. And it seems like everybody has a peptide stack nowadays. And you're right. It is usually coming from non-credentialed individuals who have basically done their own quote unquote research, which is basically they've just had some success with whatever they've tried. Now, yes, it is a rabbit hole. However, it can be a very, very short rabbit hole because peptides that are marketed as peptides right now, because like you had said, GLP-1s are peptides, anything that ends in "ide," right? Semaglutide, liraglutide, those are peptides. Those have been around for a very long time to treat diabetes. But the peptides that are being marketed as an injectable for everything from like tanning to like a cognition, I don't know. Those are not FDA approved. So any clinician who practices evidence-based medicine, which we all should because we took an oath to first do no harm, we should be prescribing, recommending, educating on FDA-approved medications and things like that. Because FDA has a strong oversight on things. They test the safety. They test the efficacy. How effective is something? They test the potency. How strong is this? They test for interactions. They also test for if there is other substances, if it's contaminated. So FDA testing and approval is really, really important. And that's why it takes so long for drugs to actually come to market, because the FDA cares about our safety. And so maybe in a few years, I don't know, these will be have proven to be safe and effective and have a stamp of FDA approval. But until then, an evidence-based clinician should not be prescribing them. And I actually think it's very predatory for a clinician to promote them and to sell them. And I'm ashamed of doctors, PAs who are doing that, because we practice evidence-based medicine and it hasn't been proven in any human literature. It may have been studied in rats in a small portion, but we know humans are not rats. We cannot extrapolate that data into the human biology, into our body. We don't know how it's going to respond to us. So safety is first and foremost. You also have no idea where you're getting that drug from. It could be contaminated with a ton of harmful things that you don't know. And we also don't know. So I can't really test you, nor do I have a treatment if you contract something. So my piece of advice that I would love to leave your listeners with is be very cautious of someone who is promising drastic results, or who has said, this worked for me, So try it, because that is not how science works. Science is not based on anecdotal data. It's not just because it worked for me, it's going to work for you. We need much stronger data than that to actually have a piece of evidence that's proven. The other thing that, again, you need to be reminded is that people who are promoting these peptides are selling them. They're making money off of you. And that just feels icky to me. I'm a clinician. I make $0 on any prescription that I write. I don't make money when I prescribe Wegovy. I don't make money when I prescribe amoxicillin. I don't make money when I give antibiotics or vaccines. I make $0. That's how medicine should be. I should be giving you the best care based on the research, not based on profit. And so any of these pop-up experts on peptides, they're really preying on your desire for that outcome, or because you want to look like that person, and selling you something that could be harmful for your health. So for now, until we have more human data, I advise against peptides and I recommend working with a dietitian. And if it's weight loss you're seeking, go for something that's more FDA approved, that you can have a team behind you. And we know that that's been proven, there's efficacy and safety behind it.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think what scares me too about the "it worked for me" anecdotes are, okay, you've been taking it, you said, for 3 months and you feel good, and that's our basis for it worked?
Right.
Like, what about 3 years from now?
Uh-huh.
What about 10 years from now? We have no idea what this could possibly, turn into over time when you're just injecting something into your body. And what I find ironically funny is a lot of people, and again, this is kind of a touchy topic, so, not to like be political or anything, but a lot of people that were fearful and did not want to take the vaccine for COVID are totally fine with injecting themselves with these things that
Yeah.
we don't actually have any, concrete evidence for. So that's really what, scares me. And I'm so glad that you said that and that you put it in a way that is so, it makes that vast rabbit hole very simple to understand and to see that, okay, wait, we don't have any evidence because the people that are pushing it, are making it seem like it's totally safe and it works wonders. Anything that's being marketed as a miracle is like a red flag immediately for me anyways. But yeah,
Yeah, immediately. And as adults, a lot of us are on medications for chronic medical conditions. We have no idea what that does to the level of your prescribed medication in your
right.
body. Is it going to make it more effective, less effective? Are there going to be other side effects? So that's like just one tiny piece of what we need to study with these peptides. Like, it's the wild, wild west out there. So don't have FOMO that you're not on a peptide stack. I'm not on any peptides. Like, it's fine to kind of go back to the basics. Do what science has proven over and over again. Work with dietitians like Sam to kind of get you on that path. And I promise you, I know it's not sexy, but slow and steady will win the race. That consistency over time is what's going to give you longevity. That's our ultimate goal. We want to be healthy and functioning and thriving in our 70s, 80s, 90s. And honestly, with the peptides, they're only promising that you're going to be tan and have a six-pack ab in like 2 months. We have no idea if they are even going to make it into their 70s and 80s yet. We don't know how safe or dangerous these peptides are. So don't have FOMO and just kind of stay the course.
Amen to that. Love it. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for taking the time with me. I have to tell you that I have shared so many of your podcast episodes with my clients because even though your podcast is kind of geared for other clinicians, the conversations that come out of it and the content that comes out of it is so amazing that, I'm always like, oh, this person would love to hear this, and I just talked about that with this client, and I'm always sending it. So if my peoples want to find you, and they should, please tell us where we can find you.
Well, thank you for sharing. That's probably the only reason I made it to 100,000 downloads is because you're sharing it. So I so appreciate that. And really, it is like if you want to sit in on clinicians, and it's me, a PA and dietitian, and usually another dietitian or a PA in obesity medicine or women's health, it's like you get like a sneak peek inside of our coffee chat. That's how I like
Hmm.
to have it. Like, come on in and you get to like listen in on our conversation because I really tailor the questions to like, if a patient asks this, how should I answer it as their PA? So it's almost like you're getting your questions answered in a roundabout way. So it is absolutely uh you could glean something from it. It's not too sciencey or too above your level there. We're just a bunch of nerds who love talking about nutrition and making it applicable for everybody and anybody. So the podcast is called Exam Room Nutrition. It is on Apple and Spotify. I also have an Instagram handle, the same thing, Exam Room Nutrition. I share sort of more fun reels and kind of clips and tidbits on nutrition topics there as well. So I would love if you come and hang out with me. And if you find me, just send me a message on Instagram. Let me know you heard me on Sam's podcast.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Colleen. Hopefully, we can do this again.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you
Mm.
so much. And thanks for all the work that you do. You're such a blessing to your clients and patients.
Oh, thank you.